Imagine being born into American royalty. Your great-great-great-grandfather built railroads and ships that connected a nation. Your mother is a fashion icon whose name means luxury and elegance. You graduate with honors from Princeton. The world is yours. And then one summer day, it all ends on a 14th-floor terrace in Manhattan. This is a story about privilege, pressure, and a family that will never stop asking why. The Vanderbilt legacy. To understand Carter Cooper's story, you have to understand the weight of the name he carried. The Vanderbilts weren't just wealthy. They were American aristocracy. His great-great-great-grandfather Cornelius Vanderbilt built an empire in the 19th century through shipping and railroads that made the family one of the wealthiest dynasties in American history. The Commodore, as he was known, turned a small ferry business into a transportation monopoly that connected the entire nation. Cornelius Vanderbilt started with nothing. Born in 1794 on Staten Island to a poor family, he began working on ferryboats as a teenager, but he had vision, ambition, and a ruthless business sense that would make him one of the wealthiest men in the world. By the time of his death in 1877, his fortune was estimated at over $100 million, equivalent to billions in today's dollars. He controlled steamship lines that dominated water transportation along the East Coast and into the Caribbean. Then he pivoted to railroads, consolidating lines into the New York Central Railroad system that connected New York City to the Great Lakes and beyond. But the Vanderbilt fortune was about more than just money. It was about power, influence, and social standing. The family became the very definition of American aristocracy during the Gilded Age. By the time Cornelius's grandchildren and great-grandchildren came of age, the Vanderbilts were building monuments to their wealth that would become legendary. The Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island, a 70-room Italian Renaissance palace built by Cornelius Vanderbilt II in the 1890s. Marble House, another Newport mansion with a gold ballroom. Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. The largest private home ever built in America with 250 rooms, 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces built by George Washington Vanderbilt II in 1895. These weren't just houses. They were monuments to wealth and power. Declarations that the Vanderbilts had arrived at the pinnacle of American society. The family's influence extended into every corner of elite American life. They were major art collectors, filling their homes with masterpieces from Europe. They were philanthropists endowing universities and cultural institutions. They married into European nobility, creating transatlantic dynasties. The Vanderbilt name appeared in society pages, at exclusive clubs, at events that defined high society. To be a Vanderbilt meant something. It opened doors. It granted access to worlds most people could never enter. But it also carried expectations. There was pressure to maintain the family's standing, to live up to the achievements of previous generations, to prove yourself worthy of carrying such a legendary name. And by the time Carter Vanderbilt Cooper was born in 1965, the family's fortune had been diluted through generations of descendants, multiple estates, lavish lifestyles, and poor financial management. The Vanderbilt wealth wasn't what it once was, but the name still carried all the weight of history and expectation. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper was born on January 27, 1965 in Manhattan. His mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, the heiress who transformed herself from a scandalous poor little rich girl of the tabloids into a successful fashion designer and artist. Gloria's own childhood had been a nightmare, fought over in a bitter custody battle at age 10 that played out in newspapers across the country. Raised without genuine parental love, shuttled between relatives and boarding schools. She'd been married 3 times before she met Wyatt Cooper, and those marriages had been disasters in various ways. But Wyatt was different. Wyatt Emery Cooper came from Quitman, Mississippi, from a modest background that couldn't have been more different from Gloria's world of wealth and privilege. He was a writer, a screenwriter, and an author with a deep sensitivity and emotional intelligence. He was handsome, thoughtful, and genuinely kind. When he and Gloria married, he brought stability, warmth, and real love into her life for the first time. Wyatt was determined to give their children the childhood Gloria had been denied, one filled with love, attention, intellectual stimulation, and emotional security. Carter had a younger brother, Anderson, born in 1967. The two boys grew up surrounded by art, culture, and intellectual conversation in the family's elegant Manhattan penthouse. Their home was filled with glorious paintings and collages, antique furniture, books lining every wall. It was a place where creativity and ideas were valued, where dinner conversations might range from history to politics to literature. Wyatt read to his sons constantly, talked with them about ideas, encouraged their curiosity about the world. He took them to museums and parks, engaged them in conversations that treated them as intelligent people worthy of respect, not just children to be managed. Despite the Vanderbilt wealth and all the privileges that came with it, Wyatt insisted on raising the boys with values and perspective. He wanted them to understand that their advantages came with responsibilities, that their famous name didn't make them better than anyone else. He emphasized kindness, empathy, intellectual honesty. He was present and engaged in ways that many wealthy fathers of that era were not. The family ate dinner together. Wyatt knew what his sons were studying, who their friends were, what they were thinking about. Carter attended the prestigious Dalton School on Manhattan's Upper East Side, one of the most elite private schools in New York. Dalton prided itself on its progressive educational philosophy, small class sizes, and emphasis on critical thinking. From an early age, Carter was clearly brilliant. His teachers noticed his exceptional intelligence, but also his curiosity and genuine love of learning. He wasn't just memorizing facts to get good grades. He was deeply engaged with ideas, asking questions that showed sophisticated thinking for his age. He loved reading, would spend hours absorbed in books about history and literature. Friends who visited the Cooper home remember Carter often sitting in a corner with a book, completely immersed in whatever he was reading. He was fascinated by how societies developed, how historical events shaped the present, how ideas moved through time and influenced cultures. Even as a child, he had that quality of thoughtful introspection that would define him throughout his life. But Carter wasn't just a bookish introvert. He had friends, participated in school activities, had a social life. People were drawn to him because he was genuinely interested in them. He had a gift for listening, for making others feel heard and valued. He asked questions not to show off his own knowledge, but because he wanted to understand different perspectives. Even among the children of Manhattan's elite, who often competed to prove themselves the smartest or most accomplished, Carter stood out for his humility and kindness. His striking looks, those hazel eyes, light brown hair, gentle features, came from both parents. He had Gloria's elegance and Wyatt's warmth in his face. But more than physical appearance, he inherited his father's emotional intelligence and his mother's artistic sensitivity. He saw the world through a lens that appreciated nuance, complexity, the shades of gray that exist in all human situations. And then everything changed. In January 1978, Wyatt Cooper began experiencing heart problems. He was only 50 years old, but had a family history of heart disease. On January 5th, he underwent open-heart surgery at New York Hospital. The surgery should have been successful, but complications developed. Wyatt suffered a heart attack during the procedure and never recovered. He died on the operating table, leaving Gloria, a widow, and his sons without their father. Carter was 13. Anderson was 10. The loss was absolutely devastating. Wyatt had been the emotional center of the family, the steady presence who'd given the boys their foundation, who'd shown them what a good man looked like, who'd demonstrated through his actions what it meant to love and be present. And now he was gone suddenly without warning, without a chance to say goodbye. For Gloria, losing Wyatt meant losing the one person who truly loved and understood her, who'd made her feel safe and valued for who she really was, rather than for her name or her money or her connections. She fell into deep grief. The apartment that had been filled with Wyatt's presence now felt empty, haunted by memories of better times. Every room held reminders of him. His books, his clothes, his reading glasses, the chair where he'd sit with the boys. For Carter and Anderson, it meant losing their father during crucial years of their development. Anderson would later say that his father's death radically changed who he was. He became more introverted, more concerned with survival, less outgoing. The person he was before age 10, he said, was probably more interesting than the person he became after. He withdrew emotionally, building walls to protect himself from future pain. But what did Wyatt's death do to Carter? He was older than Anderson, more aware of the finality of death, perhaps feeling more responsibility as the elder son to somehow fill that void. The family had lost its anchor, and Carter may have felt pressure to be strong for his mother and younger brother. Did he suppress his own grief to take care of others? Did he feel he needed to step into a role he wasn't ready for? We'll never know exactly how Wyatt's death affected Carter's internal world, but it's impossible to believe it didn't leave deep scars. The Cooper family had to figure out how to survive without Wyatt. They went through the motions of life, but the joy had gone out of their home. Gloria tried to be strong for her sons, but her own grief was overwhelming. The boys had each other, but they were processing the loss in their own ways. The tight-knit family unit that Wyatt had created now had to learn how to function with a gaping hole at its center. And they all carried forward because that's what you do. You survive. You keep going. But the loss changed them all permanently. The Princeton years. Carter enrolled at Princeton University in 1983, following in the footsteps of countless American elites before him. Princeton wasn't just a school. It was an institution that shaped leaders, thinkers, and power brokers. And Carter excelled there. He graduated with honors in 1987, majoring in history. His professors respected his intellect. His classmates admired his depth of knowledge and genuine curiosity about the world. He wasn't coasting on his name. He was earning his own achievements through hard work and brilliant analysis. Carter's interests ranged from American history to political and cultural affairs. He wrote papers that demonstrated real insight and original thinking. He engaged in intellectual debates with the same thoughtfulness and care he brought to everything in his life. Friends from Princeton remember him as someone who listened more than he talked, who asked questions because he genuinely wanted to understand different perspectives. He had the rare quality of making other people feel heard and valued. In a place like Princeton, where egos can run rampant, Carter's humility and genuine interest in others stood out. During his time at university, Carter also maintained his close relationship with his mother and brother. He'd return to New York for holidays and breaks, spending time with Gloria in the family's Manhattan penthouse. The apartment was filled with his mother's artwork and collections, photographs and mementos from the family's history. It was home, the place where memories of his father still lived in every room. Anderson was at Yale by this time, and when both brothers were home, Gloria had her sons together. Those moments were precious to her, her surviving family intact despite the loss of Wyatt. After graduating from Princeton with honors in 1987, Carter began his professional career in publishing. He worked as a book reviewer and editorial assistant, roles that suited his literary interests and intellectual abilities. He joined American Heritage magazine, where his research and editorial skills were highly valued. American Heritage was a prestigious publication focusing on American history, exactly the kind of place where Carter's knowledge and passion could shine. His colleagues remember him as dedicated, intelligent, and easy to work with. He had that rare combination of brilliance and kindness that made people want to be around him. Carter also spent time in Washington, D.C., working with the Public Interest, a journal devoted to political and social policy. He was building a career in the world of ideas, contributing to important conversations about politics, culture, and society. His future looked bright. He was 23 years old, Princeton educated, working in meaningful roles, part of a legendary American family. What could possibly go wrong? But what nobody understood was what was happening inside Carter's mind. Depression doesn't care about your degree or your last name. It doesn't care that you're brilliant or kind or have every reason to be happy. It's a disease, an illness that distorts everything, that makes the world seem hopeless even when objectively everything looks perfect. The summer of 1988. By the summer of 1988, Carter had been seeing a therapist for about a month. He'd been dealing with depression, though the extent of his struggles wasn't fully understood, even by those closest to him. Gloria Vanderbilt would later say that she believed an asthma medication he'd been prescribed, salbutamol, may have triggered a psychotic episode. The drug had known side effects that could include mental disturbances, and Gloria clung to this explanation for years, needing to believe there was a medical reason, something that could explain the inexplicable. But the truth is, we'll never really know what Carter was experiencing in those final days and hours. Depression and mental health crises don't always announce themselves clearly. Sometimes people hide their pain remarkably well. Sometimes there's a moment, an impulse that overwhelms all rational thought. And sometimes the people left behind spend the rest of their lives searching for answers that don't exist. July 22, 1988 started as an ordinary Friday. Carter was at Gloria's penthouse apartment on the Upper East Side. The apartment was on the 14th floor of the building with a terrace that offered views of the Manhattan skyline. It was home, the place where Carter had grown up, where memories of his father lived in every corner. Anderson wasn't there. He was away, starting his own life and career. It was just Gloria and Carter. According to Gloria's account, which she shared years later in her memoir, A Mother's Story, and in conversations with Anderson, Carter had been sleeping. He woke up in what seemed like a dazed state. He came into the room where Gloria was, and something was clearly wrong. He seemed disoriented, not fully present. And then he went out onto the terrace. Gloria followed him, growing increasingly alarmed. Carter climbed up onto the terrace wall, a low wall that separated the terrace from a 14-story drop. He sat on the wall 13 floors up with 1 foot on the wall and 1 foot hanging over the edge. He kept looking down at the street far below. Gloria begged him to come back. She screamed at him over and over. She pleaded, "Carter, come back. Carter, come back." For a moment, she thought he was going to listen. For a moment, there was a possibility that he would swing his legs back over, step down from that wall, and the day would end differently. But then he didn't. He went like an athlete, Gloria said, hanging over the wall. She kept calling his name, kept begging, and for just a brief moment, she thought he was coming back, but he let go. Carter fell 14 stories. His mother watched him disappear. The son, she called her perfect child, the brilliant young man with his whole life ahead of him, was gone in an instant. Gloria later said there was a moment when she thought about jumping after him. But then she thought of Anderson, and that thought stopped her. If she jumped, Anderson would have lost his entire family, father, brother, and mother, before he was even 22 years old. Emergency services arrived. The police came. The investigation concluded quickly. There was no note. Toxicology reports showed no drugs or alcohol in Carter's system. It was ruled a death by a certain method. A young man in crisis who'd made a decision in a moment that couldn't be taken back. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, 23 years old, Princeton graduate, thoughtful and kind, was dead. And nothing would ever be the same again for the people he left behind. The aftermath. Anderson Cooper was 21 years old when he got the news that his brother was gone. He wasn't there when it happened. He didn't see it, didn't hear his mother's desperate pleas, didn't watch Carter fall. But the impact on Anderson was immediate and permanent. In interviews decades later, he would say he thinks about his brother and his death every single day. Every single day, not some days, not often, every day. For Gloria Vanderbilt, witnessing her son's death was a trauma that would define the rest of her life. She stayed in bed for days crying, unable to process what had happened. Friends came and went. Carter's friends visited, and Gloria would look into their eyes with what Anderson described as wild desperation, searching for some explanation. But no one had answers, and so Gloria would tell the story of what happened, going through every detail, reliving those final moments over and over, wondering if there was something, anything, she could have done differently. She replayed it constantly in her mind. What if she'd moved toward him? Would that have startled him into falling? Or could it have given her a chance to pull him back? What if she'd said something different? What if? What if? What if? The questions haunted her. She wrote in her memoir that she wanted to die in the aftermath, that the only thing keeping her alive was going over the pain again and again. The first Christmas after Carter's death, Gloria and Anderson went to the movies and then to an automat. From that point forward, they never really celebrated Christmas again. The holiday was ruined forever, associated with that first terrible Christmas without Carter. Anderson struggled to grieve while watching his mother's anguish. For days he'd lay next to her in bed, holding her, talking with her, listening as she went through the story another time. But eventually, he reached a point where he couldn't listen anymore. He couldn't hear her relive it again. The repetition was too painful, and he needed to try to move forward somehow to find a way to survive this devastating loss. But how do you move forward from something like that? Anderson would later say he spent years wondering if he too would end up suffering from depression like his brother. Would he inherit that darkness? Was he safe? Or was the same fate waiting for him somewhere down the line? The fear was real and persistent. Loss became a theme in his work and his life. He became fascinated by questions of survival. Why do some people thrive in situations others can't tolerate? Would he be able to survive and get on in the world on his own? His brother's death sparked Anderson's interest in journalism. He initially tried to get entry-level work at networks, but was unsuccessful. Eventually, he found his way to Channel One, a small news agency that broadcasts to schools. But Anderson didn't want to sit at a desk. He wanted to go to combat zones. So, he took a camera and by his own admission snuck into Burma and then Somalia in 1992 during the famine. He was drawn to places where life and death were immediate concerns, where everything was raw and real. He needed that after losing his brother. He couldn't stomach dinner party conversations about trivial things when he'd experienced profound loss. He needed to be around people facing real struggles, real survival. Anderson's early career choices were unusual for someone from his background. Most people with Vanderbilt connections would have walked into comfortable positions at major networks or media companies. But Anderson deliberately chose the hard path, the dangerous path. He went to war zones, disaster areas, places where Western journalists rarely ventured. In Somalia, he witnessed the horror of famine and civil war. He saw children starving, families destroyed, a nation collapsing. These experiences were transformative. They gave him perspective on suffering, on resilience, on the arbitrary nature of who lives and who dies. Looking back, Anderson recognized that much of his early foreign reporting was about testing himself, about not being sure he could survive, about wanting to be in situations where survival was an actual question. It was his way of processing the trauma, of trying to make sense of a world where brilliant young men from perfect families could suddenly be gone for reasons no one fully understood. Every dangerous assignment was partly about proving to himself that he could handle adversity, that he wouldn't break under pressure, that he was tougher than the darkness that had claimed his brother. Carter's death also created an unbreakable bond between Anderson and Gloria. They were the two remaining members of their immediate family. They'd both lost Wyatt. Now they'd both lost Carter. They only had each other. That closeness defined the rest of Gloria's life and shaped Anderson into the person he became. When Gloria turned 91, Anderson made a deliberate decision to have intentional conversations with her because he didn't want there to be anything left unsaid between them. His relationship with his father hadn't been as open. Wyatt died when Anderson was still a child. Anderson didn't want to have regrets with his mother. They communicated through emails for a year, which eventually became the book The Rainbow Comes and Goes, A Mother and Son on Life, Love, and Loss. It was an attempt to preserve their relationship, to document it, to leave nothing unresolved. When Gloria died in June 2019 at age 95 from stomach cancer, Anderson had the comfort of knowing they'd said everything that needed to be said. They'd spent Gloria's final 2 weeks together before she passed, and Anderson discovered during that time that they laughed the same way, something he'd never noticed before. After Gloria's death, her artwork found a place in Anderson's New York City home, keeping her presence alive. But even decades later, even after building a successful career and starting his own family, Anderson struggles with his brother's loss. In 2019, on the 31st anniversary of Carter's death, Anderson posted photos on social media of them together as boys and wrote that he still finds it hard to comprehend that his brother took his own life at only 23. He admitted there's not a day that goes by when he doesn't think of Carter and miss him terribly. He still wonders what Carter would be doing, who he would be, what conversations they might have had. Anderson told Howard Stern in 2014 that he'll always struggle with the why. With situations like this, he explained, "We want to think it's clear, but it's not. That's the horrible thing. Family members are left wondering why for their entire lives. Sometimes, Anderson said, there isn't any why. Sometimes there's just an impulse that couldn't be contained, a moment that changed everything. And no amount of analysis or searching will ever fully explain it. The legacy of loss. Carter Vanderbilt Cooper was laid to rest in the Cooper plot of the Vanderbilt family cemetery in New Dorp, Staten Island. He's buried alongside other members of the Vanderbilt dynasty, part of the long history of one of America's most storied families. When Wyatt Cooper died in 1978 and Carter in 1988 and Gloria in 2019, they were all buried together. The family that experienced such devastating losses is now reunited in death. But what is Carter's legacy? How do we remember a life? Clear's throat. Cut short at 23. A brilliant young man who never got the chance to fulfill his potential. Friends and family remember him as thoughtful, intelligent, and kind. They remember his love of history and literature, his genuine interest in other people, his gentle presence, his Princeton education, his work in publishing. These were just the beginning of what could have been a remarkable life, contributing to important conversations about culture, politics, and society. He could have been a writer, a historian, a voice in American intellectual life. We'll never know what he might have accomplished. Think about everything Carter missed. He never got to see his younger brother become one of the most respected journalists in America. He never got to witness Anderson's coverage of hurricanes and wars, the Emmy Awards, the success that came from all that pain and testing in dangerous places. He never got to meet Anderson's son, Wyatt, named after their father. He never got to grow old with his mother, to have those deep conversations about life and loss that Anderson and Gloria eventually had. He never got to write the books he might have written to share his insights about history to influence a new generation of thinkers. Carter never got to fall in love, to marry, to have children of his own. He never got to travel the world as an adult to see all those historical sites he'd read about and dreamed of visiting. He never got to experience his 30s, his 40s, the decades when people often do their most important work and find their deepest satisfactions. 23 years. It's barely the beginning of adulthood. It's finishing school and starting your first real job, and then it's over. What we do know is the impact his death had on the people who loved him. Gloria Vanderbilt spent the rest of her life carrying that grief, replaying those final moments, searching for explanations. She wrote her memoir partly to help other people dealing with similar tragedies, to offer empathy and assurance that it's possible to survive even the worst losses, even though you never fully heal. Anderson Cooper built a career partly shaped by questions of loss and survival that came directly from losing his brother. He's spoken openly about grief, trying to remove some of the stigma around discussing mental health and loss of life in this way. In 2022, Anderson launched a podcast called All There Is that explores grief and loss. He interviews other notable people about their experiences. Stephen Colbert, Laurie Anderson, Molly Shannon, and others who faced profound losses. The inspiration came from his own life, losing his father at 10, losing Carter at 21, and losing his mother more recently. The podcast is his way of continuing the conversation, of helping others feel less alone in their grief, of making something meaningful from his family's tragedies. Carter's story is a reminder that mental health struggles can affect anyone, regardless of privilege or opportunity, or how perfect life looks from the outside. Depression doesn't care about your last name or your degree or your loving family. It's a disease that requires treatment, understanding, and compassion. Carter's death came at a time when mental health wasn't discussed as openly as it is today. When getting help carried more stigma, when medication side effects weren't as well understood. If Carter's story can help even one person seek help, if it can encourage one family to have honest conversations about mental health, if it can reduce stigma and Clear's throat increase understanding, then perhaps his short life and tragic death can contribute something meaningful to the world he left too soon. That's what Gloria hoped when she wrote her memoir. That's what Anderson hopes when he talks openly about his brother and the grief that never fully goes away. The Vanderbilt name carries weight, the weight of history, of wealth, of expectations, but it couldn't protect Carter from the darkness he faced. Couldn't save him on that July day in 1988. And it can't bring him back or answer the questions that still haunt his family more than 3 decades later. What it can do is ensure his story is remembered, that his life mattered, that the brilliant, kind, thoughtful young man who loved history and books is more than just a tragic headline. He was someone's son, someone's brother, someone's friend, and he's missed terribly every single day. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.